Talking About Horses, bringing you closer to some of the best horsemen in the world for tips, insights, and stories. Listen at home, at work, in the car, or in the saddle. This is Talking About Horses. Here's your host, Patrick King.
Okay, hey there gang, Patrick King here, and I want to thank you for tuning in for episode number 29 of Talking About Horses. Today I'm pleased to be joined by Canadian horseman Jonathan Field. Jonathan's an acclaimed horseman and much sought after clinician for his amazing results with both horses and their owners, teaching people a program inspired by horses. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me for this podcast.
Patrick, great to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Awesome.
It's a privilege.
You bet. So now we're chatting, and you're at home in Canada right now, is that right?
I am, yeah.
Okay, so
yeah,
where exactly is home?
So, just two places at the moment, and we're just moving, so it's a little confusing. So we have a place close to where I was raised, in a place just out of Vancouver, and so we have a farm there, and then we also have a ranch just 2.5 hours away in a place called Merritt. So before the kids were really, really involved in school, when we could take them out more, because I've got an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and before we could take them out more, we spent, at least half the year up at the ranch. So it's a beautiful ranch. Cattle are there, all the horses are there, and everything's there. And we do horsemanship camps up there, but now we're spending a lot more time here. So it adds another layer of confusion because we're going to sell the place in Abbotsford. It's in Abbotsford, British Columbia, which is Western Canada, and like I said, close to Vancouver. And we're moving to Kamloops, which is a place a little further away than from our ranch. So we bought another ranch, and we're gonna move the whole family kind of more up in the interior, and they're going to go to school up there, and we bought a quarter section, or 160 acres up there, and it's a nice place. So kind of more where we want to be.
Gotcha. Fantastic. So for anybody out there who's listening who maybe doesn't know who you are, can you give us a little bit about your bio? How did you grow up? When did horses become involved? Kind of the nitty-gritty there.
Yeah, of course. I was lucky enough. I was born in a horse-loving family. My mom and my dad both rode horses to school in the prairies in the middle of Canada. And my mom was a dressage enthusiast, and my dad, he started colts and rode with a farrier and worked on some ranches and things like that. And that's kind of what brought them out west originally. And they actually worked on a ranch in Kamloops. That's where we're going to move for a few years. And I was my mom was really passionate about us, both my sister and I, becoming involved in horses, and we both loved them. And, I started as an English rider. My mom was, like I said, a dressage enthusiast, and she actually had something very in common with you because she's still a very passionate horse woman, and I believe it's the Valencias, is that correct, who you go see in Portugal?
Yes, the Valença family, yes.
Yeah, so she goes over there too now, and she's been going overseas to go see them and some others around there, and she's very fascinated with that whole thing that you're doing.
Oh, that's awesome! That's fantastic. Very cool, very cool. So you grew up riding English. Now we see photos of you in a cowboy hat all the time. When did that switch happen?
Well, I got to say it was like English and Western. I was in 4-H, and we did, trail and Western classes and English classes, and I had a dressage coach and that kind of thing, and just, kind of really wide variety of stuff, and trail riding with friends. But my parents introduced me to some people in Merritt, British Columbia, where the James Creek Ranch is, and it's called the Colchana Ranch, and they met some people there, the Rose family. And they were on it's a big outfit ranch, several 100,000 acres. And, just with the cow camp and the cow-calf operation. And when I was a young guy, about 14, I guess is maybe 13 when I first went there. And my folks were asked to come riding up there and hang out and maybe go to some brandings and things like that. And I was invited by a dear friend who ended up becoming just like family to me, a gentleman named Mike Rose, who was a family of the ranch and a manager of the ranch. And he invited me. He says, "Hey, young fella, you want to come and hang out a little bit more?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to ride with the cowboys." And that was when the breeches were gone. Absolutely. and I went up in the summers when I was 14 onward, and then eventually, I guess I was about 15, I was able to convince my mom to let me get out of school because I was missing the good times of the year. You know, the fall gather, spring turnout.
Oh, yeah.
Be there for a couple of days. Yeah, you don't want to miss that when you're 15 years old. So
right.
I would get on the Greyhound bus and pack up my stuff, and I'd go up and see Mike, and he would, guide me through the whole thing. And then when I got my own pickup at 16 years old, I could go up there and spend a lot more time. So, yeah, I really was grateful for that period of time, just putting in those, we worked 6 days a week. I had a string of horses, and we're out there on a real working ranch, living in a cow camp with the cowboys and the horses and the dogs and a cook, and moving the herds of cattle around through the different rangeland, and those cowboys are out there still. That very, it still exists today, which people really should know that culture and the care for those animals and the way that they move through these massive open ranges, and the care that they have for those the horses and the cattle and so forth and the dogs. It was just a really, really amazing start. Just thousands of hours in the back of the horse.
Wow. Living the life for sure. And it's easy for us, like you said, it's important for people to understand that's still there. It's easy for us to forget about that because we've become so modernized.
Yeah, we didn't have quads or helicopters and that kind of thing. It was, we were proud to trot to work and trot back home or walk back home. A lot of the cow bosses that were there tried to burn as little fuel in the trucks as they could and have us trot out in the mornings. And, early starts, you jingle the horses in, 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning sometimes. And the horses eat before people eat, so you go down there and get them saddled up and put them in a tie stall and give them their grain and so forth, whatever they're going to get, maybe a bit of oats or something, and then we go up and have breakfast, and we're leaving the camp, which is up in the mountains. We're leaving the camp to go to the cattle way before sunrise, and sometimes the stars are up, sometimes it's raining or something like that, but you're out there trotting along with a bunch of cowboys, cowgirls, and dogs and border collies, all excited to go out to work. And it was just such an. As a kid, I didn't want to do anything different. I didn't want to go for trips to Hawaii or I just didn't. I wanted to be with those horses and I wanted to have that experience.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. That would be the way to grow up, right? That's awesome. So now
that's one of the reasons.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that's one of the reasons we're moving to this big ranch, to this new place. It's right in the middle of ranching country, and my boys can have that opportunity up there. So
fantastic.
We really want to provide that. It was so pivotal to my life, and that's why we want to move up there.
That's great. And that's going to be fairly close to where you were originally then, yeah?
Yeah, it's just an hour away, and all those ranches are kind of interconnected there, and I know a lot of those families and people, and so we have quite and our ranch, the ranch that's up there, the James Creek Ranch is there as well. It's within an hour and a half, so it's all kind of closer together to where we want to be. So, and it is a lifestyle. It really provides that. It's beautiful country.
Yeah. Awesome. So then fast forwarding to from growing up, fast forwarding to life now as a clinician and a trainer going down the road, what happened in between there? What made you decide to go the clinician route?
Well, it was, it's an interesting story. Like, I was on those, working at that ranch, and I was 19, and my family, my dad, after he was done with his, kind of the horse period of time, and my folks, they started up a water well drilling company. It was a small little drilling company at the time. Just he was a driller, and he hired a helper, and Mom kind of started looking after the books and so forth, and they had done that for many years. And by the time I was 19, I said, I can hardly afford the insurance on my truck. Of course, I wasn't the top cowboy on the string, so I wasn't, cowboy wages are not very much as it is, but I certainly wasn't the top guy there at my age. So, I wanted to go make a little bit of money, so I went on the water well drilling rigs at the family business. And I wasn't there very long before I got pretty badly hurt I reached in to pull a cap off a drilling rod, and we were in not northern BC, but mid BC, in a place called, or just out in the bush near a place called 100 Mile House. And we were, 20 minutes into the bush, and a big piece of steel fell down and amputated my left hand, all but a half-inch of skin, and cut all the tendons and the bones and crushed it all, and all the blood flow and all that. So I was able to get to the hospital, and through a long recovery, I just woke up in the hospital after that, and I didn't know I was going to be a clinician. I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew that I was definitely wanted to maybe go back cowboy. I knew I didn't want to go back to those drilling rigs. That felt like a major mistake at the time, and I just said I want to be with horses. I remember, my mom and my wife to be, not my wife now, and I was 19 at the time. We're sitting there, and I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And it had only been a very short time before that. I was 18 years old, and I was still a working cowboy, and I had a full beard, and I was, I hadn't been in school for several years by now, and I had met Pat Pirelli, and I just seen what he was doing with a horse, and my mom, who's always been such a driving force in this, was hosting a demo for Pat, one of the first trips, nearly one of the first trips that he did to Canada, and him and Linda Pirelli came through the Fraser Valley here just out of Vancouver, and they pulled in, and he kind of had this little low spot in the field, and we made almost like an amphitheater, and I came down from Merritt to watch this horseman guy. I wanted to see what he was all about. Mom was telling me he was pretty amazing, and I seen that he had this horse, and this horse was probably 200 yards away, 100 yards away, whatever it was, and he had it in our backfield. It was our backfield. It was a 10-acre pasture, and there was a little horse in there named Scamp, a little roan mare, and he had electric wire around it, but there was no electricity on it, and he electrified off, or didn't electrify, but made this pen. This pen was, I don't know, half an acre, I guess. He wanted his horses to walk around. They'd been on the road, wanted to walk around and graze. And he had in a little amphitheater, 100 yards away, he had this little round pen set up. And he was going to do his demo in the round pen. So he put his mic on, and he walked over to this amphitheater, or to this where the pen was, where the horses were. And he lifted it up, and he made this gesture. And his horse came walking, or maybe even trotting over to him. And then he lifted up the wire, and the horse went underneath the wire into this open 10-acre pasture, which was my pasture, where I live, where I grew up.
Wow.
And she's loose. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, I had to rope my horse that morning to catch it. Up in Merritt. And I was in a round pen with, 35-foot round pen with 15 head of horses in there. And I was thinking, what is the deal here? And then he walked the horse over to the demo, and he was starting, Pat was starting to introduce how, his whole program. And I thought, whatever he knows, I need to know, because I've never seen that before. And then, because I was working cowboy at the time, and I was just trying to keep up with the learning curve of, not getting in trouble, staying out of the way, or doing the right thing, or, on the ranch, and they were extremely long days, 12, 14-hour days all the time, long days in the saddle. There was not really, and a lot of purpose. You had, the job was to move the cattle and look after the, the ranch, and I just couldn't, there's no way I could begin learning that. I was trying to keep up with my own curve of learning and survive the days. And, I didn't have an ounce of fat on me. I was just, it was long, long days.
Yeah.
So we got after that had happened, I got that introduction to Pat, and then it was, that was when I was 18 or something like that. And then 19, I got hurt. And then, Pat and I somehow connected with him after, and it was a really unique connection to kind of have him come back through town, and he really went out of his way for me, and essentially offered me an apprenticeship, and what he did, and then I got some really special time with him and with many people who I met through him, and then that kind of opened my eyes up to go back up to the ranching country and see some of the horsemen and realize what I had learned from some of those great horsemen up there that I got to ride with. And a lot of them are horsemen and cattlemen. You'd never know their name, you'd never meet them, but they are they develop bridle horses, and they start colts, and they know how to handle cattle. And I started to realize all the lessons those guys were trying to teach me. And then I, of course, when I went back to ride with them over the next many years after that, I could actually see what was happening. I had my eyes open to what it is to start to understand this thing called feel. And before I didn't, even though I'd won ribbons and jumps and did all that kind of thing, I was a rider, but I wasn't knowing what it was to strive to become a horseman. So,
gotcha. So you talk about that word feel. How would you describe that?
How much time do we have? I don't. It's it's such a difficult thing to summarize in a short way. But if you just think about feel, the way that anybody can see when there's feel, because you can see it in a flock of birds when they're all in synchronized. You can see it in a herd of horses all moving, a mare and a foal. You can see it in a school of fish, or two great dancers, an orchestra, how they have feel for one another. And when there's a lack of feel and somebody's off time or out of tune or a little faster or a little slower, it's obvious. But when something is really synchronized and there's a harmony to it, that's when it's in feel. And there's with a horse in particular, there's a softness and acceptance and a willingness that comes through it, like an acceptance, like there's, like it's a person and a horse together, but it's almost like there's two horses together, where there's not this predator and a prey animal, a human and a horse, and the human kind of drill sergeanting around, or mind-numbingly over-exercising the horse, maybe with circles or with whatever, to where there's a loss, a heavy hooves hitting the ground, and the sour look in the eye, and the posture goes away, and they lose feel. So it's easy to see when there's no feel, but it doesn't make it easy to attain feel, of course. Gotcha.
So it's kind of like, you mentioned an orchestra. That'd be kind of like a professional guitarist picking up a guitar, and then me picking up a guitar. You can see where there's feel, and you can see where there's not.
Yeah. One of my mentors that I was so privileged to get to know was a gentleman named Ronnie Willis, and he was introduced to me by Pat Pirelli. And Ronnie said, sometimes it's hard to tell. It's hard for a feller to tell where the horse stops and the human begins. And I think that's like what you described with a guitar. A really great guitarist, Eric Clapton type or something like that. They've become one with it, and you can see them. And that's the same thing that I think that the great horsemen, when you see these great relationships they have with a horse, they talk about the relationship with the horse. They talk about that horse and who that horse is. And, like I like to go out and I like to introduce my horses. Here's Hal, here's Quincy. Most of the people that, know what I do, they know my horses, because each one of them are different. And, when last weekend in California, I had some thoroughbreds, an older 11-year-old, a 13-year-old broodmare that had 4 babies and been on the track and been a riding horse a bit, but, pretty worried. And then I had a 3-year-old filly that was pretty worried for, that couldn't make it on the track because she had a wreck in the gate. So I took them both to the horse. I didn't take them, but they brought them to the horse expo and said, would you like to handle them? And I said I wanted to use more challenging horses for people to show me, this is what you do with a horse when it's not working. And I made a point, like we wanted to know about the horse, we wanted to know about, where they're coming from. And then as I did the talk and tried to, help those horses kind of gain confidence with me, we have to have a sense that each one is different, and each one sometimes they need to move, sometimes they need to stand still, sometimes there's a combination of that, and how to get them connected to us, and when to rub them and when to push them back, and when to defend your personal space, and all those things. That's learning that is kind of the process in the way we learn to begin to have a feel with a horse.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's great that you bring that up, because when we announced that we were doing this broadcast together, I had several people message me, and they mentioned specifically how you introduce your horses at your demos and at the expos and that sort of thing, and how much they love that, because it gives them a sense of, who everyone is out there in the arena.
Oh, wow, that is cool. I'm glad they appreciate that. And for me, I want to celebrate them. I'm proud of them. I'm amazed they do these things for me. I remember I was talking to Kurt Pate. We had breakfast together just last Saturday morning there at the Horse Expo. We went off and went on to the Delta King. It's a paddle boat there down in Old Sacramento. We were talking about having the background of being working cowboys and on these ranches, and the respect and the feeling that you get when you look at that horse and you go, oh, I'm sorry. I remember one horse, an older horse at the Coshana Ranch. His name was Ilahe. And I remember we were turning these, we were bringing these bunches of cattle. We're doing turnout, and these cow-calf pairs. We're pushing them up this hill, and so we get a bunch of 50 or whatever it was, we'd get them all together, unloaded off the trucks, and then the cowboys, me and a couple other guys would get them up this side of a mountain, and we get them to the top, and we mother them up and hang out with them and go down. And it was always quite a journey getting those horses up. And the first trip of the day, most people would have said, okay, that's it for my horse today. The one trip. I remember on the fourth trip of the day, it was hot in the day, and the cattle didn't want to go up the hill, and they were going off the banks. Actually, the third trip was really hot, and I got down ready for the fourth trip, and I looked at that old horse, Ilahe, and I thought to myself, how are you even doing this anymore? I couldn't believe this horse could still do this. And we would pull our saddles off and let their backs cool off at the top of the hill. We did all we could, and to try to preserve and look out for them. But man, what a horse can do for a person. And he was ready to go back, and up we go again. And then he walked all the way home that night with me on his back, and you just gain this incredible respect and love for the horse that when you're out there and you're having they're the ones that have to bring you home.
Right.
I think that a lot of times if people haven't had that, and it's so hard to understand what that is if you haven't, because we're used to pressing the gas, and as long as we can sit in the chair and steer the wheel, it doesn't matter 12 hours, 13 hours, that thing will keep going, keep the fuel in it. There's no sense of it. But
right.
The horse, you get a pretty great respect for the horse and what they can do. So that's why I introduced them. I want to celebrate them. They did not pay a ticket to get. They didn't say, they didn't show up and say, hey, Jonathan, I'd like to head out there and see what I can show my skills off today.
Right.
So they don't owe me anything.
Right.
So I think to be able to go out there and and have people understand too, they're not just horse bots. They're real horses, and that's why I like to let them run and play and buck and do all that stuff. And
that's awesome. Yeah, and it's cool that that several people actually messaged me to tell me that was one of their favorite things, and they were looking forward to this interview because of that. So I thought that was really cool.
Wow.
Really cool. And they used the word that you just used too, horse bots. So that's pretty interesting. Can you explain that word to us?
Well, sometimes, I sometimes people, I was doing a talk last weekend, and I got the wonderful highlight. This is the one thing great about this career is that sometimes you get to meet your idols, and then I even got to do a presentation with one of my idols, and it's Dr. R.M. Miller, Dr. Robert Miller. And we were doing a talk to a group of people, and we were talking about, the things in the horse that are the nature of the horse, and to be herd down, to be oversensitive, to fly from fear, and these kinds of things. And so many times when I have conversations with people, they're so frustrated with the herd down nature. They're so frustrated with the oversensitive nature of a horse. And for me, when I see people try to take that away, they try to just, to grind away on the horse enough that they're not oversensitive anymore. They've kind of broken the spirit to be herd bound or have that because people call them barn sour or, whatever, those kinds of things. And for me, herd bound's the best thing of the day. I mean, if a horse wasn't herd bound, I wouldn't even know the first place to start with a horse. I wouldn't know the first place to start with a lion, but because a horse is herd bound, I go, great, get him herd bound to me. And because he's oversensitive, oversensitivity is the best news of the day. Like they have radar antennas for ears, eyes on the side of their head. They can shake just their skin on their shoulder for just a fly lands on it. That's sensitivity. That means he could be or she could be that sensitive to me. So this is the best news of the day. So when I hear people want to get rid of those things or look at those things, I think to myself, why don't you get a quad? You don't have to worry about herd bound. You don't have to worry about oversensitivity. You can however you want. Go get a quad. I mean, you're looking for a horse bot here. Like, they're not that way. Don't try to get them to be that way. They're living creatures with their own needs. They've got a whole ethology that we need to understand. And if we do, you can get them to do pretty cool things if they start looking at you like, hey, you might be one of us. I can be comfortable with you. I don't have to always be thinking about the gate, or I don't have to always be thinking about the barn and my buddies. It's a pretty neat feeling.
Yeah, I like that. In other words, don't try to make the goldfish a golden retriever, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I like that idea, the herd bound to me. I like that. That's a pretty cool way to look at it.
Yeah. They can be, and there's amazing stories. Like, I just finished reading recently that book, Snowman, Harry and the Snowman. the $80 Plow Horse, written by Elizabeth Letts, and I just was so grateful. I got to go have a friend of mine, Eden, down in California. She organized a dinner to meet Elizabeth Letts, the writer of that book, and I got to visit with her about Harry and about the Snowman, this $80 Plow Horse. And for those of you who love horses out there who haven't heard of this book and this story, you gotta read it. And there's a Netflix video. I haven't watched the video yet, but I've read the book. And when you hear what that horse did to stay with that man, you just think to yourself, wow, that capacity is in them. I don't want to give it away, but it's pretty. There's some just amazing moments in there that you think, how did that horse, or why did that horse do that? And there's definitely a pull, like that herd-bound nature. There's definitely a pull there, and I felt it with my horses. Doing what I do, I don't have to go on to say the next weekend and place first to keep this horse because a customer owns my horses or someone else. No one owns my. I own my horses, or I don't even own them. So they're with me. Nobody's taking them away. So I don't have to have that pressure. So I get to do other things. I really each horse does a little bit different. They all play at liberty. They all ride. They all jump. They all chase cows. They all ride bridleless. They all do all those things. And then each kind of horse gets to kind of be coming out to their own. You find out what do you get to do with this one. I had Andalusian stallion, shipped over from Spain, a beautiful black stallion named Cameroon, and he's totally different than the horse Quincy that I got. He had 6 homes in 7 years, and he was a horse that was having really, really huge trouble in life, and he was rearing and flipping over and extremely spooky. And I mean, Quincy and I went out and did demonstrations in Lexington and rode with the horse and got standing ovation. And this horse, I never said, okay, Quincy, this is the box you need to fit in. This is what you're going to do. And then believe me, I should tell you this, Patrick. I tried to put him in. I tried to contain him a bit. I tried to, but I learned from him more than ever because I made a million of those mistakes. But then I eventually kind of said, okay, partner, what is it we're going to do here? And then I followed down a different path. And as a result of that, I got to actually know this horse, and his eye changed, and his whole look about him changed.
It's amazing how they change when you ask them the question of what it is they really want to do with themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Liberty work that your horses do, and I know you've fairly recently released a book, right, on Liberty training?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did that. That was from the Genesis. That first time I seen Scamp go across that pasture, was kind of the moment that sparked that for me, the interest in that. And I love playing with horses at Liberty. I think that it, in a safe way, as long as you to me, it's got to be. I like to do it in a way that it is exactly in line with how I eventually want to ride that horse. The horse has bend, the horse has balance, the horse is listening. It's not like a game of tag or something where I'm, there is a real structure in how I do it, but there's also freedom in the horses. So I want them to, have correct movement in their body and bend and so forth, but also have the ability to leave and I even send them away. Because I think it kind of opens up a door to the horse. One of the horses that I got, was, Quint did it with all of them, but, was that horse I told you about earlier named Cam. Mm-hmm. And Cam had, he had all the kind of the pre-bullfight training. He was on his course to do that in Spain. And, and the training was so different. And he had such a different life before I got him. I got him as, I think, a 7 or 8 year old and stallion, and he lived in a box stall for a long time, and didn't have any buddies, and that kind of thing. So when I got him and I rode him, I felt like I could. And even when I played with him online, I mean, he had this Seretta on him before I got him, so the whole thing was just a totally different situation than I was going to go with him, and I couldn't. Every time I would do anything with him, it felt like he was never opening up to what I was doing. So Liberty was a way for me to kind of establish an entire other language with him and meet this horse. And I didn't ride him for months. I wanted to ride him, but every time I did, it just felt like it wasn't what I was wanting. Like there was all this access here, but I couldn't get it with what I was doing with him. I'm sure the people that rode him before me rode him beautifully. I never seen them ride him. And actually, I did see one 5-minute section, but that's all I ever seen. And anyway, so this opened up a door. It opened up a door for me with him to then get on his back and have this other relationship. And in the beginning of it, it was really, really fun because it taught me to be more sensitive to the horse. It taught me to notice the subtleties, and that's why I ultimately ended up writing a book about it and teaching it. And we start online, and then we slowly progress so that when the horses are finally loose, in reality, you don't even need to turn them loose to know that it's working. They could still be on the line. So it starts out very much on the lead rope, and then teaches them where to be and what to do, and teaches the people to do that. And then, of course, in my book, I talk about my story and the why and all of that even more, obviously.
So I've seen, I would say, a few different types of working with horses at Liberty. Some of them are involving just being in the round corral, some of them in more open arenas, and like you said, the kind of the inspiration with Pat Pirelli and his horse out in your pasture. What does it mean to you then to work with a horse at Liberty?
Well, I really focus on playing with a horse at Liberty, so just change that one little term.
Okay.
It's just that context of play is that, but for me, play is not always like running the beach and, burning incense kind of deal, like, we both, it's kind of serious play, like there's kind of rules and boundaries, of course, because you start turning horses loose, they can kick you easily or run you over, something like that. So it's play, but it's also, it's a type of thing where you allow that horse to have some freedom, and they can get out there and express their energy, and they don't contain it up. It's almost like it kind of blows the cobwebs out, so to speak, when they can get out and move around like that. So that's one of the main reasons that I do that. I'll take them out, and even if they, it could be an older horse, like now Quincy's 20-some years old, mid-20s, and I bring him out and I just kind of turn him loose, and he gets to go around the whole arena and just trot around. He's not on a lead rope and nothing, maybe in a round pen or a big arena. And it kind of lets him, he starts at the walk and he looks around, he sniffs around. Next thing you know, he's kind of guys push him up into the trot and then get him cantering around there, moving, and it wakes him up, and then he starts getting more tuned, and he starts looking at me, and I go, okay, we got the saddle over here, Clint, let's get ready to go. And it might only be 10 minutes of that, but it allows the horse, it allows me that time for him to go, hey, when are we going to start doing something? Rather than the moment I bring them out, I've got a whole legal, but I go, this is what we're doing today, Quincy, this is how it's going to go down, this is what you're going to do. Oh, you got to stand here, don't stand there, you got to do that. They never get to say, like I first started Liberty, I didn't want my horse to break free. So I remember, I remember the real moment where it started happening. I remember I was asked to do a demonstration, and it was in a big arena, and lots of people, and I just didn't want my horse to run away and not come back. I thought, how horrible would that be, So, because I'd actually seen that happen before.
Sure.
So I was like, I don't want to be that guy, And so I got my horse to Hal. It was a horse named Hal, who's on the, he's on the cover of my book with Quincy and a couple others. And Hal was there, and I had Hal listening, and I practiced. And I did Liberty, I did bridleless riding as well, so no saddle, no bridle. You're on the ground, you're on the back, whatever. Anyway, so I'm practicing, and I never let him leave. And you know what happened, Patrick, was next thing you know, I did the demo, and everything was good, and everybody's happy and whatever. But I went back and I watched it, and I could see in Hal, his ears were, sometimes the horse's ears go back, right? And the horse's ears go back because they're listening sometimes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they go back because they're driving you. They're kind of like, they're like, kind of like turning into aggression, right? Mm-hmm. And other times they go back because they're tight, too tense. The horse is like, and I call that like connection tension. They're kind of like, kind of a thing. And I looked at the video and I noticed it just looked like Hal's ears were not back just listening. And he certainly wasn't driving, but he had like a sourness about him for a bunch of times. And I was just like, what am I doing? And so I said, no, I can't do it like that. I'm going to send him away. And I remember when I did, I sent him away, and he bucked and he ran, and he bucked and ran like he had this incredible pent-up tension. And I thought, where did all that come from? Because he was just circling around me a second ago. And I thought, that horse has that much tension, and he's obeying me that much to stay. I started looking at, I call it connection tension. He had connection tension. I asked for his attention, his attention, his attention, his attention, his attention. I never even let him look away because I was worried he'd run away. And I kind of flipped that thing around. I said, you know what, forget this. I want him to run away. I'm going to send him away. I want him to go out there and run, and that he can go run, and that's one of the things that I do in my demonstrations all the time now, is I send them out to gallop. Here are a bunch of horses, guys. Here's what they look like when they're running. My horses are normal horses. They're not horse spots. They're out there running. They're having, well, not the people to keep the horses with them are horse spots. It's just was my preference.
Right.
And I wanted them to run, and then next thing you know, those horses will do a lap or two, and they go, so what are we doing anyways? And they'll kind of look over. Go, I don't know, come on over here, let's do something. And it perked the ears up. It took that tension out of it. And one other moment I seen that kind of made that happen was, if they did break away, they would break away. Like they were with me, and then they would be with them, and they go, pew, gone.
In the next county.
Then I thought to myself, that horse is with me, wishing it could be away. You see, but if I sent him away more, and then I could get him to want to come with me, if they did happen to go, most of the time they just forgot what we were doing, and maybe I made an error, and they just drifted away. They didn't burst away. So there's little things that that kind of changed how I did or why I did Liberty that I did. And ultimately, though, Patrick, the big thing for me is I'm very purpose driven. Like I still have cows to move or want to go. I still use my horses to start colts. I still I do bridle demonstrations with them. I still jump. I took jumping lessons all last winter on one of my horses that does tons of Liberty. I do this to connect with the horse. I play with them to connect. I play with them to blow the cobwebs out. I play with them to see where they're at, to get connection with them. I do it from a very practical point of view. Yeah, it goes out and the people like to watch it, and we put music on and have fun and do demonstrations and things like that. But the real practical reason, even if I didn't do any of that, is because it's just so refreshing for the horse, and it's so damn fun to learn and to, go out there. Even if you have 20 minutes and you don't want to get through the whole saddling and all of that, you go out there and you play with that horse at Liberty for a little bit, and you move him around, you interact with him, you gain that little string connection, that little bit of feel, and you go, hey man, that was fun. See you tomorrow. And or you do that just before you ride, or whatever it is. There's just so many practical applications to kind of get a horse connected, get the horse with you, away from the barn, away from the other horses. On top of which, I think it teaches us to be sensitive to the horse, way more sensitive, because if you have the saddle, you have the bridle, if you have everything there, the lead ropes and all the stuff, you can just pretty much almost do, you don't have to, you can lead quicker and stop slower, stop faster, and you can be, pretty interruptive and the horse doesn't leave. But if you're at Liberty, you break that connection, they leave. Then you kind of have to look at yourself and go, can I change the way I communicate? Can I, be a little better here?
Yeah, it becomes more of a truth test right there.
Oh, it's huge. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Very cool. Very cool. So you mentioned the jumping lessons, and I've seen some video clips of you working taking some lessons with George Morris, yeah?
Yeah, that's another one of those things. That's another one of those highlights. And George is a mentor and a dear friend. And throughout the years, I met George at an event called the Main Event, and it's a horse expo. And I did a bridleless and bareback and a Liberty kind of a horsemanship demonstration with my horse Hal. And at the end of it, I jumped over these barrels, no saddle or bridle, and we had the upright barrels. And I think I only had one or two barrels standing upright. And Hal cantered up there and jumped over these jumps. And George happened to catch that, and he said, and he goes, I'd like to talk to you. I said, oh, right on. He goes, I really love the demo, and I'm getting ready for, all of this pump up, and he did like the demo, but he goes, hey, listen, I seen you jump the jump, and I go, oh, yeah, thank you. He goes, if you ever want to learn to jump, come down to Florida, and I'll teach you how to jump. I said, absolutely. And anyway, so and obviously I had tons to learn about it, but so he invited me that year, and I didn't want to say, hey man, I'll see you on Thursday. It was one of those handshake deals. I met him for the first time, and So I said, I'd love to do that. Thank you, sir, for the offer kind of thing. And, anyway, so I did the demonstration the next year, and he was there the next year, and he came up to me at the end of the game. He said, listen, Jonathan, I'd love to, if you want to ride together, if you want to come down and ride some nice jumping horses, and I'd be happy to hang out, and I like what you're doing and whatever. So he really liked some of the bridle stuff and the way the horse is carrying himself and so forth. So he said, I'd like you to field these horses if you'd like. And I said, listen, is this offer for real? Because I don't, I'm going to show up on your door.
Right.
And I went down and I spent 5 days with him traveling around. We did lessons on these amazing horses where the property was owned by some, American royalty kind of thing. And in Wellington, Florida, in February, went to the big shows and met all these horses and people. And anyways, took lessons from him daily, and then did that for a year or two. And then eventually was asked by him to help this lady, one of his dear friends with his horse that had been had an injury, and it had to be hand walked. But the horse, it was kind of a difficult barn. The stall was nice, but the cobblestone alleyway and getting out to where the horse could be walked, and the horse was really, it was a Saint Francais. It was really, obviously well bred, and he had to be stall rest for so long. They had to slowly hand walk him, but he was so energized they couldn't get him really out without worrying about a wreck. So because he would spin around, and the two grooms couldn't kind of keep him under control. So they asked me, would you come over here and whisper out, blow some incense, whatever it is you do,
blow some incense.
Yeah, whatever you do, and help this horse. And George said, well, I happened to be at this cafe with George at the time, and George said, you want to go back there and help that horse? I said, yeah. And so he sat in a golf court and watched me, and I was able to, in half an hour, I was walking the horse all around the property, dead quiet, and the lady was too. And George was so excited and kind of enthralled with what I did. He said, if you ever want to do any more together and that kind of thing. So we ended up making it a really one-of-a-kind DVD series together, and it's a combination DVD series where I teach my stuff in the beginning, and then he teaches his. And we called it jumping, but I'm telling you, I shouldn't have called it jumping. I should have just called it horsemanship, equitation, jumping, dressage for jumping, that kind of thing, because it really ties together what I do in the ground with what I do in the beginning, with obstacles and, when those first rides and that kind of thing. And then we just got the most amazingly documented version of George's story. Like all those lessons, Patrick, I would go and watch him, and I could pretty much pick up George's program. I'd watched him for enough years, watched enough of his videos, read his books, but I just said, George, I always pick up, he has a system. And he, wherever the horse is at, he picks up on step 10 and then 11 and 12, and then you might see step 3 with one horse and step 4, 5 with another one, and 13, 14 with another. Mm-hmm. But I just say, can you lay out your system from 1 to, 20, if you will? I just want to video it all, and we did, and we developed this amazing video series together. So it kind of grew to that. And then he actually came to an event I produced called Jonathan Field and Friends, and we had George Morris and Craig Johnson, who you interviewed. I love that interview.
Yeah.
My friend from Gainesville, Texas, the reining trainer, and now Craig is in the, he's endeavoring in all, going around the world teaching clinics and ranch horse competitions and things like that. So Craig is such a wealth of knowledge. Yeah. And another friend of mine from Texas named Bruce Logan. So George, Craig, and Bruce and I all came together in Calgary and did an event called Jonathan Field and Friends. So we just talked horsemanship and showed how those worlds all intersect and tie together so that people from every background can hopefully benefit from one another. Like George says, the horse is the horse. So it's, we tend to make too much, the jumpers versus the hunters versus the barrel racers versus, the horse is the horse, my friend.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. And it's interesting because as we're chatting, your phrase connection tension is running through my head, and I'm thinking, that's not just a Liberty thing. That's a rein contact connection. That's a leg contact connection. Connection tension, man, you could see that in everything we could do with a horse.
We do. I was talking to people about that the other day because I seen this horse. It was a jumper horse, and it had all these rub marks on the side of where the legs are, and And, there's obviously all these complaints about this horse, why he this and that and whatever. And I thought, I said, no wonder why he's dull to the age. No wonder why his tail is ringing, his ears are back.
Right.
And, it was like, I said, there's so much tension. You're grinding on the horse. The horse has no freedom of you. Mm-hmm. Like, even from liberty, you can even do liberty where the horse has no freedom of you. They can't get away no matter how far they move. Like, one of the things I should mention, like, how did I help that Saint Francais horse? Well, one of the things that I did was, in that box stall, he was in that box stall and there was an alley. And I got him to think, but he had to have space of me. Like, I went in the box stall, and he was already nervous of me coming in. And I went in the box stall, I got a halter on him, and there was like this board, like between the box stall and the cobblestone, right in the doorway, there was like a big, almost like a railway tie, and it was like level with the floor, but it was a piece of wood. So I went in there and I took him and I taught him to put his left foot on it, and I taught him to put his right foot on it, and I engaged that thinking side of his brain. Mm. And then what I did was I could walk him a circle in the box stall, teach him to stop. I could back him up a step, and then he was doing fine because he was in his box stall. And at first he didn't do all of this, but of course I played with him for a little while. And then I could put his left foot. I could put both feet. He was getting kind of proud of himself. He's like, put his left foot. Then I could walk him out of the stall. And the moment I walked out that door, you could just say, oh, here's the wreck. So I walked him out. I turned him around in the alley, and I said, hey, can you put your foot on here? And he went from, oh, I'm out in the alley. I get to run free, and I got to go crazy, to, oh, did you mean put my foot here? And I got him to be able to where he could walk 10 feet from his box stall, come back, and put his foot back on that piece of board. And then I could walk him to another 2 box stalls down and put his foot back on the other board, and then walk him into another box stall. So I could go from 1 box stall to 2 box stalls down. Well, there was, along the edge of the grass on the outside where the grass was with the driveway, they had those ties, those garden ties. Mm. So I did the same thing. I walked him out of the barn. The very first thing he did was he kind of spun around, and I was like, this horse is worth more than my house. Yeah. So I can't, and I just went, because I already had planned, I said, I'm going to put his feet on there. And, within seconds, did you want me to put my foot here? And it just engaged that side of his mind. And when he was thinking, I guess this is the point I'm trying to make, is that when he was thinking, I didn't interrupt him with a bunch of cues. I didn't grind and pull and tug on his face. Remember, I'm on the ground. I'm in hand. Mm-hmm. And then I could go back in the barn to the first box stall, back to the second box stall, back to the outside. And by the time I did about 4 trips like that, I could walk him all over the property. It was about half an hour. And the lady was in tears. She's like, I've never seen a horse thinking like that. I thought, how is this possible? Like, that this happens, that we don't see this, like myself included. Like, I had rode horses. I put hundreds of thousands of miles on horses. I hadn't seen that either, and that's why I'm passionate about what I do.
Yeah.
I want my kids to see that. I want other people. As you well know, Patrick, you open that door up to people, and you get them thinking about a horse in a little different way, and all of a sudden now we kind of get into their world a little.
Yeah. Well, it seems, and it's this is just popping in my head as we're talking about this, but there's definitely a difference between looking at a horse and seeing a horse. Mm. It's easy to look at one, but that horse you're talking about right there, you had to see him. You couldn't just look at him; you had to see him to get those things to come through for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I like that, man. That's cool.
Very, very interesting. I'm let's see, I'm looking at the time here. I want to be respectful of your time. So, real quick, and then we'll get into kind of some wrap-up questions here. This is fun. I feel like we could be chatting for a couple hours here. We're going to maybe have to do this one again.
I feel the same way, yeah.
This is awesome. So I also noticed that you are a fellow pole dancer. I've seen some clips and photos. Yeah, back in the good old days at Chippendales. No, I've seen some clips of you with the Garrocha. How did you get started with the Garrocha?
Well, oh man, I really hesitate calling what I do the Garrocha and that stuff. The reason is, Patrick, because guys like you and you know about that stuff. See, what happened with me was I have this horse, Quincy, the one that was rearing and, all of that stuff, right? And he was flipping over, and he was really difficult. And I finally got him to where I could ride him. And I rode him bareback for like a year or so, or more, just because he would rear, I'd slide off, I'd play with him, I'd do, move him around on the ground, I'd get back on and carry on.
Right. Less chance of getting hung up that way.
That's right, yeah. And I don't recommend that to a lot of people. But I don't recommend them being on a horse that flips over either. But you know, I was kind of on, trying to learn this path and trying to help this horse. And as a professional horseman and just a high desire to figure them out, I wanted to pursue this with this horse. So I learned a lot from him. But so I got him past that. I got him kind of to the point where I could walk and trot and canter, and I could ride him out of the arena. I could ride him in the arena, and a flip over was not happening anymore, and a rear would happen rarely. But this horse, you know, he always had the feeling, like every time you pick up on the reins, or every time you go catch him, or every time, like I remember when I first met Quincy, he'd be eating his food, you'd walk down the barn alley, and he could see you coming, he would stop eating about 20 feet before you got there, he would watch you go by, and as long as he knew you were going to continue, he'd go back eating again. You know, he just had a real bad feeling about people. So after I kind of and we're talking after a while, a couple of years, 3 years maybe, where I could get all this going, and he wasn't doing these regular rears and this kind of thing, and he would get all tight in his back and his neck and whatever. I could, you know, do some stuff. But the horse never felt like we were doing it together. It always felt like I was doing it to him. And he always had that feeling back to me. And, you know, I was always leery that, you know, I'm in a tight spot, this horse can properly flip over, because he was deadly when he did. And I couldn't really get through that. So I was always riding a little bit tight too. And when I got that stallion from Spain, a lady that I got him from showed me about the Grocha pole. And she had the actual pole from Spain. And I seen it, and she said, you know, it's a wonderful way to give purpose to a horse and this and that. And I thought, you know, I wonder if I could do that with Quincy. Because I was looking for something, because I'd almost turned him out because I just wasn't really making progress. I could ride him, but I wasn't getting anywhere. And I picked up that pole. I bet you I loped 2 circles around, or cantered 2 circles around, maybe even trot. And it was like that horse was like, are we going around that pole right there?
Yep.
And we were doing it together. Instead of me steering him around the pole, him resentful of my leg pushing him over, or my hand, or my rein, or whatever, asking him to come over, he'd go around it. I rode him for the next couple of years. I didn't ride with anything but the pole.
Yeah.
That's the only horse to this day. This is the only horse I've ever done this with to date. I've never, and we've done it to thousands and thousands of people. They think I'm I'm not trying to represent any traditions of a bullfighting situation or that whole, what you guys do. But I'll tell you, it's been the way of connecting with this horse, and I did get to learn a bunch from her and then another friend of mine that knew about it and learn how to hold it and do all of that. But I do it with only that one horse in mind. I don't know that I'll ever do it with another one, but he just blooms.
That's awesome.
And it fills up a whole room. There'll be, I've been in places with 8,000 people, and he fills the room. It's been quite an amazing thing to learn that. It's been so fun.
Yeah, it's fantastic how it changes their focus.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Oh, I said it's fantastic how it changes their focus.
Yeah, and I got to get a lesson from somebody that actually knows what they're doing with it one day. So I'm asking for a lesson. That'll be when we meet. I'll say, give me a lesson.
Hey, that'll be great. That'll be great. I look forward to that. It's it's interesting. I've found and I've started doing this, but I will pick up a Garocha as early as possible now when I start a colt. There's some on the first ride I pick up that Garocha. Maximum 6 rides I start picking the Garocha up. You take these young horses, and honestly, it came from the time that I spent with Ray Hunt about giving the horses a purpose. But if you're riding a colt, even as early as the first time, and you ask them out in the middle of the arena, turn your hip, move your shoulder, they kind of sometimes look at you like, well, why? But man, when you've got that pole there, they say, you and I, we need to move my shoulder here so I don't bump into that pole. Or we need, So I've started using that so as early as the first ride with a lot of young horses, and it really changes things.
Wow, I'd love to do that. Whenever I talk to people about it, I'm always hesitant to give any kind of education around it. The only thing I do say is that, and this is where I think they need to have lessons from somebody who knows like all the little ins and outs like you do about, and even the history and the culture. But the thing is, I have had that thing swipe me nearly off a horse before. If you don't put it down on the right angle, or if you're galloping across an arena somewhere and you stick the thing in the ground, it can move real fast. And
Yes.
You don't want to hurt you or your horse.
You go from a pole vaulter or a pole dancer to a pole vaulter real fast.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking that. That's right. That's what you call it. Yeah, you're right, my friend. But that's cool. I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, definitely. It's so cool. And of course, they gotta kind of have the mind for it, But man, it changes things right away. Right away.
What I did start doing, because of it, I actually did start dragging around a stick. So not a stick, but like our horseman stick with a string. And I would start dragging that around, and that would simulate the pull. And I did do a lot of that with other horses.
Yeah.
I just found it to be so valuable. Like you say, purpose.
Yep. Well, and I found if you can, I do a little exercise I call pinwheeling, where you're rotating the pole as you're riding the horse. And I found, little things like that. If you can ride with the garrocha, you can rope off of them. You can drag something off of them, and you never run the risk of getting tangled in the rope, right? You just drop the pole.
Yeah.
So I find it to be a little,
Good point.
I hesitate to say safer, because if you're doing it right, it's all safe enough. But I find there's less risk. Well, you're riding with a giant skewer, so I don't know if I should say there's less risk. But, I found it's a really good introduction. Maybe that's how I should say that.
Yeah, well, and I've seen before where somebody kind of starts to drag something with a lariat rope of some kind, and then the horse spins around and gets it around the back tail, then clamps the tail, and then goes for a run.
Exactly.
And that rope is stuck underneath the tail. That can get, business can pick up pretty fast.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can't say that it would never happen with a garrocha, but I've never witnessed it happening with a garrocha.
Yeah,
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, thank you. I want to be super respectful of your time here, so I've got a couple wrap-up questions here. We're going to go into speed round for wrap-up, if you're cool for that. So
you got it, buddy.
Okay.
I'm fine for the next few minutes here.
Okay, cool, perfect. So, if there was one specific thing that you would recommend for riders to focus on as a primary means of improving their horsemanship, what would that be?
Oh boy, that's a tough one, buddy. One specific thing. For riders to improve their horsemanship, I think the study of who the horse is, like what does it mean to be a prey animal, and what type of prey animal are they, and what does it mean to be a predator? Because we are in the predator category. Dr. Miller and I were laughing in our little talk about this the other day, but I often will tell people, you're a predator. You might be super nice. You might burn incense. You might be a vegetarian, but you're still a predator. The way that you think comes differently than the way a horse thinks, and the way that comes out in action, in how that you might sneak around a horse to, say, put a bridle on or to get a horse clipped. Well, getting into that sneaky kind of mode is predatory mode. And interestingly enough, what Dr. Miller would say is, he says, horses are not afraid of, predators. Prey animals are not afraid of predators. What they're very alert to is they're alert to the predatory behavior.
Yeah.
So, somebody can be doing something and they're very casual and they're around the barn and they're sweeping and they're doing this and that, whatever, but then they think something's going to spook the horse, so they slow down, they get a different stance, they go slowly to put the saddle pad on, and all of a sudden that sneaky, like a border collie stalking the cattle or the sheep, is a predatory behavior. Mm-hmm. So to understand those types of things, like the way their eyes work, their eyes are a fixed lens. Ours is a lens that is like a scope. It can change without adjusting the height of our head. So they have to adjust the height of their head. Those types of differences, to have an understanding of the horse would be the number one thing. I think that's what I talk about the most as I travel around the country.
That's awesome. Let's see. If you could ride with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh, boy, Patrick, you're hitting me with tough ones.
So much for our speed round, right?
You know what? I often wanted to be around for was the first time a person rode a horse. It was past. The very first time somebody rode a horse, what the motivation was, what the circumstance was.
Yeah.
So if I could ride with them, that'd be kind of cool. That
would be. I'll bet that was an interesting cartoon that took place, too.
Yeah, well, I bet there is. Yeah.
Awesome.
And there's a whole list. I mean, the list of people living presently is like, I'd like to ride with you, man.
Oh, I hope we can make that happen. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. What is your present personal definition of horsemanship?
My present personal definition of horsemanship?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
My present personal definition of horsemanship. I mean, fundamentally, I want my horse to want to be there as much as, I want to be there. But I don't, I don't know that I don't know that I'll ever achieve that. But that's what I'm trying to strive for. So, I want to, man, that's a really tough question, I think it's so broad. Like, one time I heard a surfer, describe himself, and it was a guy named Laird Hamilton. You ever heard of Laird Hamilton? He's a big wave surfer.
Yeah, I have heard.
I mean, Laird Hamilton was one of the first guys that helped develop that method, where they tow-in surfing, and he had a crew of guys, and they were just amazing surfers. And I just, kind of looked up to this guy, and I'm not a surfer whatsoever, but he was always regarded as one of the best surfers, or the best surfer, in the category at the top. And I remember one time he says, I don't look at myself like a surfer. And I thought, really? He doesn't look at himself like a surfer? How's that? Like, how do you like the best surfer I've ever heard of, kind of thing? And with the methods and the whatever he had developed. So, especially at the time that he did. And he says, no, I'm not a surfer. I'm a waterman. And a waterman knows the texture of the ocean. A waterman knows how to sail. A waterman knows, how to canoe from island to island or paddle from island to island. And of course knows how to surf, and knows how to surf small surf and big surf, and teach kids to surf, and dive, and all of those things. And I think as a horseman, I think we want to learn about foot care, and we want to learn about the dentistry side of it. Not that we have to understand how the mouth works and what happens if the teeth aren't looked after, the saddle fit, the biomechanics, how bits work, what feel is, how the prey animal is. So I don't know if that's a very simple definition. And
no, I think that's
to learn
great.
all that, to try to attain where we want that horse to want to be there. But I know that's unrealistic, the part about them wanting to be there. I know if we open up all the gates, that gets more real all of a sudden, because the gates are still closed on my ranch.
No, right.
If the gates were open, then it might be different if Hal and Quincy stuck around. But they do have, 30 acres, so they're doing okay. Maybe they'll come back.
Right.
But I think to strive for that, because I see a lot of times in the horse world where in fact, that if you were that horse, there's no way you'd want to be living under those circumstances. So to continually strive to be better and understand, take a walk in a horse's horseshoes, like get where they're coming from, and try to adapt to that. And then, of course, with what I do, with what I want to do, I'm purpose driven. I want to be able to go do all those. Like, people often ask me about different methodology and things like this. And I say, well, hey, that's great. As long as it gets me to be able to ride on them, rope on them, chase cows on them, jump them, start coats on them, teach off their back, and gallop down a side hill if I need to chase a herd of horses, whatever. If I can do all those things, then I'm happy to use that technique. But so that's kind of where my focus is.
I like that. Much more broad spectrum, but that's super important. Like you said, all those little pieces, all those facets. So I like that. Great. Okay, this one should be easier. So what book are you currently reading, or what was the last book that you read?
Well, I just finished Snowman, and that's why I'm talking about it so much. I finished that one, and that was I got the next one in her installment called The Perfect Horse. I haven't started it yet, but that's the next one. And so I was late to the party with Snowman book, though, because it seems like everybody has read that.
I haven't read it yet either. So
you have, okay, good. You got to get that one. But I will tell you, Patrick, the last one I read, which I didn't read it, but I just finished it. And because I was on the road at so many miles traveling and driving, I didn't have the time to read. So the last book I read was Snowman. But the last book was To the Far Blue Mountains with Louis L'Amour. And that's about Barnabas Sackett's journey to go from England, escaping the Queen, and come over to North America here. And I just was immersed in that. I think I've been reading that book since I was about 15 years old. I'm going back through them again, so I'm at the beginning of the journey of the Sacketts now. So
that's awesome. It's always cool to revisit those old books, isn't it?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
And just listen, because, and we're moving to this, we're moving up into the bush here, and we're moving the kids. So in a little tiny way, I feel like it's a little bit like Barnabas Sackett, but, not quite the same. I'm not, there's no pirates on the ocean.
Right.
There's, there's actual, like there's Walmart, and there's a few other little amenities, but, in a way, I'm following down his path.
That's awesome. I love that. Cool. All right. So how can folks find you?
They can go to my website, jonathanfieldhorsemanship.net, and I hope they go there and they can see some videos, and they can email our office if they have questions or something like that. But I really appreciate being invited onto this, Patrick, and really it was a lot of fun, and I hope we get to catch up again sometime.
Thank you. Likewise. So one little last question, and this one gets to be flipped around. So when I do these broadcasts, most of the ones that I do myself, I ask a question of the day at the end, and that's for the audience watching. We ask them a question, they get to answer the question for us, and anytime I have a guest on with me, the guest gets to ask our audience the question of the day. So before we go here real quick, what's our question of the day for the audience?
Oh, you want me to pick one, or do you pick one?
Sure, no, you get to pick it. Any question you come up with.
I would say, and it's a big, what drew them to horses? What is it about the horse? And I would love to read an answer more than just like, I just love them, but I'd love to read an answer like, what is it? Like, I'm trying to answer that question all the time. What is it that drew me to horses? I'd love to hear what somebody would have to say about what is it that drew them to horses, because I know people that are drawn to horses, and they're in New York City, they never owned a horse, but their whole house is covered in horses.
Yeah.
There's something in there, and I'd love to hear people. Always love hearing people's stories about what drew them to horses. What does that feel like for them when they're around a horse?
Yeah. That's awesome. I just had a fellow ride with me the other day in a clinic up in Connecticut. He was from, I believe he was from L.A., had never been around horses at all in his entire life, but was always drawn to them, and decided that was it, I'm going to go start riding. So really interesting.
And that person probably knew that since he was 10 years old.
Yep, exactly. And just it wasn't until much later that it was actually able to happen. Yeah.
And Patrick, the other thing is, like, we've done different things in our lives. Like, I've gone skiing or water skiing or whatever, different things. Boxing. I've been boxing for the last 3 years on and off. Just for fun. But those things, like, they can kind of come and go in our lives. And I'll bet you, I will never hear from you going, oh yeah, I did the horse thing. It was a phase, and now I'm windsurfing. Like the
right.
People that have horses, that have that in them, like that person you mentioned, it's been in there forever. It's not a phase.
Right.
It's not like this thing. It's just something like my mom, for example. It's not a phase.
Right.
She's a horse girl through and through. She's studying. She's after. It's not a phase. This won't be over anytime soon for her.
Right.
It's her life, and I'd love to hear that answer from people. What is it that drew them to horses, or what does that feel like when they're around a horse?
I think that's great.
That's a good question.
I think that's perfect. So, gang, you've heard it. Those of you listening live, and those of you that are going to listen in the follow-up, what drew you to horses? That's our question of the day here from Jonathan Field. And Jonathan, thank you so much again for joining me for this. This has been so much fun, and I'm going to try my best to twist your arm so that we get a session 2 on this, because there's a lot more I think we could talk about.
Love to.
That's awesome.
Love to, my friend, and thank you for the privilege, and just best to everybody out there. And it was just a lot of fun. I would definitely look forward to next time.
Likewise. Thank you, and I can't wait to get the chance to ride together.
Yes, I'll take a lesson from you.
Oh, there we go. Well, we'll make a swap on that. How's that sound?
You got it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, my friend.
You bet. Thanks, brother. Bye.
You bet. Thank you. Gang, I want to thank you for tuning in for episode number 29 of Talking About Horses. I really appreciate you giving Jonathan and I your ear. Please remember that if you've missed any of it, you can access the full broadcast through Facebook, YouTube, iTunes, or by streaming directly from our website by accessing the Talking About Horses page from the Education drop-down menu. Through whatever platform you're listening, please be sure to give us a rating, a comment, a review, and a share with your friends. Your word of mouth is the fuel for this fire. Thanks so much, gang.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Talking About Horses with Patrick King. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave a review and subscribe. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit pkhorsemanship.com. We'll catch you next time.